The sound of my father's laughter still echoes in my mind, sharp and cutting like broken glass against my eardrums. There, I sat at our family's Thanksgiving table, surrounded by relatives who joined in his cruel amusement, as Robert Thompson pointed his fork at me and declared to everyone within hearing distance that I was nothing but a dreamer who would never amount to anything worthwhile in this world. My mother, Sarah, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding eye contact, while my siblings, Jessica and David, snickered, along with their father's assessment of my supposed failures. The humiliation burned through my chest like acid, as 29 years of disappointment crashed over me in waves. Then, the doorbell rang, interrupting my father's performance, and I glimpsed that familiar luxury sedan parked in our driveway. My name is Craig Thompson, and I have spent every single day of my 29 years on this earth trying to earn my father's respect. Robert Thompson, a middle management supervisor at Harrison Industries, had built his identity around being the practical one, the realist, the man who understood how the world actually operated outside of foolish fantasies and childish dreams. Growing up in suburban Michigan, I learned early that my interests disappointed him. When I won second place at the elementary school science fair with a computer program that calculated baseball statistics, Robert dismissed it as playing with toys. When I chose computer science as my college major at Michigan State, he spent the entire summer telling relatives I was wasting money on an impractical education that would leave me unemployed and living in their basement forever. Every entrepreneurial attempt I made throughout my 20s became ammunition for his ongoing lecture series about accepting reality and finding steady work. The website I built in high school that earned $300 before I abandoned it, lucky accident. The mobile app concept I pitched during my junior year that attracted interest from local investors, pipe dream from someone who watches too much television. My younger sister Jessica, now 26, and working as a dental hygienist, had learned to echo our father's sentiments perfectly. She would nod along whenever Robert explained why Craig needed to get serious about life and stop chasing fantasies. My brother David, 24, and employed at a local automotive parts supplier, found it easier to agree with Dad than defend his older brother's ambitions. But Robert Thompson had no idea what his eldest son had been building in secret for the past 3 years. While my family assumed I was unemployed and struggling, I had been working 18-hour days from a cramped apartment downtown, surviving on instant ramen, and determination, developing something that would revolutionize how Fortune 500 companies manage their data infrastructure. Cloud sync technologies existed in a world my father could not imagine, where innovative solutions commanded millions of dollars and young entrepreneurs transformed entire industries overnight. My business partners Marcus Chen, a brilliant software engineer from Stanford, and Amy Rodriguez, a Harvard MBA with an intuitive understanding of corporate strategy, had helped me build something extraordinary. We had created a cloud-based data management platform that could integrate seamlessly with existing corporate systems while reducing operational costs by 40% and improving efficiency by unprecedented margins. 3 weeks ago, Harrison Industries, the very company that employed my father in their accounting department, had acquired Cloud Sync Technologies for $12 million. Robert Thompson had absolutely no idea that his failure of a son had just become wealthier than he would ever be, or that his own employer now belonged in part to the dreamer he loved to mock. The Thanksgiving gathering this year included the usual suspects who had witnessed my humiliation countless times before. Uncle Tom, Robert's older brother, who worked in construction and shared his siblings' disdain for anything involving technology or innovation, had arrived early to help carve the turkey and remind everyone about Craig's failed ventures. Aunt Linda, married to Tom for 30 years, possessed a kind heart, but lacked the courage to challenge the family's established narrative about their disappointing nephew. My 15-year-old cousin, Brandon, Tom and Linda's son, represented the only person in our extended family who showed genuine interest in my work. He would ask questions about programming and app development whenever the adults were not listening, displaying the curiosity and enthusiasm that my own father had spent decades trying to crush. As we sat around the dining room table, surrounded by the familiar traditions of our annual feast, Robert launched into his favorite topic, explaining why Craig Thompson would never achieve anything meaningful in life. The irony twisted in my stomach like poison as I listened to him describe successful people as those who understood practical limitations and accepted realistic expectations. The conversation had progressed exactly as I had anticipated. Robert dominated the discussion, describing his work at Harrison Industries, with obvious pride explaining to everyone how important his role was in maintaining the company's financial stability. He had no way of knowing that his own department had been discussing the recent acquisition of a revolutionary technology startup that would transform their business model completely. "You know what separates successful people from dreamers?" Robert asked the table, clearly building toward another lecture directed at me. "Successful people understand that you cannot just wish your way to prosperity. You have to work within established systems, follow proven methods, and accept that not everyone can be special." Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "Dad always taught us to be realistic about our capabilities." David joined in seamlessly. "Craig just needs to understand that not everyone can be an entrepreneur. Most people need regular jobs with steady paychecks." My mother Sarah attempted a weak defense. "Craig works very hard on his computer projects." This triggered fresh waves of laughter from Robert, Tom, and my siblings. The sound of their amusement felt like sandpaper against my nerves, especially since I knew something they could never have imagined. "Computer projects," Robert repeated, shaking his head with theatrical sympathy. "Sarah playing around with websites and apps is not the same as building a real career. Craig is 29 years old. When I was 29, I had a mortgage, a family, and a secure position with a respected company. Craig has a laptop and unrealistic expectations." The psychological weight of nearly 3 decades of this treatment had shaped me in ways I was only beginning to understand. Every achievement felt hollow, because the people whose approval I most desired remained convinced of my inadequacy. Every milestone in building CloudSync had been accompanied by the voice in my head that sounded exactly like my father telling me I was fooling myself and heading for inevitable failure. But something else had been growing alongside that doubt. A quiet determination that had sustained me through the darkest moments of building my company, when venture capitalists rejected my pitches and potential clients dismissed my ideas as too ambitious. I had learned to draw strength from sources other than family approval, though the desire for their respect never completely disappeared. Uncle Tom launched into a story I had heard countless times before. "Remember when Craig was in high school, and he thought he was going to make money building websites? He spent the whole summer working on some computer nonsense, made a few $100s, and then acted like he had discovered oil in the backyard." The problem, Robert continued, warming to his theme, is that Craig never learned the difference between getting lucky once and building sustainable success. Real success requires discipline, consistency, and realistic goals. You cannot just stumble into prosperity because you know how to use a computer. Brandon caught my eye from across the table and gave me an almost imperceptible nod of support. His silent encouragement reminded me that not everyone in my family had completely written off my potential, though his opinion carried little weight in family discussions. As Robert's monologue continued, I found myself thinking about the phone call I had received 2 days earlier from William Harrison himself, the CEO of Harrison Industries, congratulating me personally on the successful integration of CloudSync's technology into their existing infrastructure. Harrison had mentioned wanting to discuss additional opportunities for collaboration, possibly involving a permanent advisory position that would give me significant influence over the company's technological direction. The doorbell rang just as Robert was reaching the crescendo of his lecture about practical expectations and realistic life planning. Robert's face lit up with the satisfaction of a man who believed his philosophical point had been perfectly illustrated. He pushed back from the table, dabbing his mouth with his napkin, as he prepared to answer the door, but not before delivering what he clearly intended as his closing argument. The thing about dreamers, he announced to our captive audience, is that they never understand why their ideas do not work in the real world. Take this recent acquisition at Harrison Industries. Some young entrepreneur just sold his technology company for $12 million. Now that is what real success looks like. Not sitting around talking about what you might do someday, but actually building something valuable that serious business people want to buy. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Robert was describing my own achievement as an example of everything I could never accomplish. Jessica leaned forward with interest. $12 million. What kind of technology was it? Data management systems. Robert replied, clearly enjoying his role as the family's source of insider business information. Something called Cloud Sync Technologies. The founder is probably some brilliant kid who understood market demands and developed practical solutions instead of chasing fantasies. That is the difference between real entrepreneurs and people who just talk about being entrepreneurs. David whistled appreciatively. $12 million. Craig, you should pay attention to stories like this. Maybe you could learn something about what actually works in the business world. The psychological torture of listening to my father use my greatest professional achievement as a weapon against my supposed failures created a pain unlike anything I had experienced before. Every word he spoke twisted deeper into my chest, not because he was wrong about my capabilities, but because he was unknowingly proving how completely he had misjudged his own son. Uncle Tom joined the discussion with obvious enthusiasm. Robert, do you know anything about the person who started this Cloud Sync company? What made him successful where so many others fail? From what I understand, Robert replied, clearly relishing his position as the expert, the founder is someone who understood corporate needs and built solutions that actually solve real problems. Not like these wannabe entrepreneurs who think they can change the world with half-baked ideas and no understanding of how businesses actually operate. Sarah attempted another gentle defense. Craig has been working very hard on his technology projects. Maybe he could develop something valuable too. This triggered fresh laughter from Robert and Tom. Sarah, Robert said with condescending patience, there is a difference between playing around with computers in your spare time and building a $12 million company. Craig lacks the business knowledge, the industry connections, and frankly, the discipline required for that level of success. Aunt Linda surprised everyone by speaking up. Maybe Craig is more capable than you think, Robert. Young people today understand technology in ways that might surprise us. Linda. Tom replied dismissively. Being good with computers is not the same as being good at business. Craig has been trying to make something work for years, and what does he have to show for it? Nothing but disappointed expectations and wasted time. Brandon looked like he wanted to say something in my defense, but 15-year-olds rarely challenge adult conversations in our family. His frustrated expression mirrored my own internal struggle between speaking up and maintaining the peace that had kept me silent for so many years. Robert continued his analysis of the Cloud Sync acquisition with the confidence of someone who had never built anything more complex than a quarterly budget report. The key to entrepreneurial success is understanding that innovation must serve practical purposes. This Cloud Sync founder obviously spent time researching corporate pain points and developing solutions that address real needs. He probably worked with experienced advisors and followed proven business development strategies. Every word felt like a dagger sliding between my ribs. Robert was describing exactly what I had done, attributing my success to some imaginary person who possessed all the qualities he insisted I lacked. Craig should study examples like this, Jessica added helpfully. Instead of working on random projects that never go anywhere, maybe he could focus on building something that actual companies would want to buy. David nodded along enthusiastically. Exactly. Craig always talks about his ideas, but he never seems to understand what customers actually need. This Cloud Sync guy obviously figured out that part. The weight of their ignorance pressed down on me like a physical force. For 3 years, I had carried the secret of my success, initially planning to reveal it at the perfect moment when I could finally prove my worth to the family that had never believed in me. But that perfect moment had never arrived, and now I was trapped in a nightmare where my own achievement was being used to demonstrate my inadequacy. Robert glanced toward the front door as the doorbell chimed again. I wonder who that could be. We are not expecting anyone else. As he walked toward the hallway, I caught a glimpse through the dining room window of the black Mercedes sedan, parked in our driveway. The custom license plate reading Harrison was clearly visible from where I sat, and my heart began racing as I realized what was about to happen. William Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Industries, was standing on my family's front porch, completely unaware that he was about to walk into a conversation where his new business partner was being mocked as a failure by his own father. The irony was so perfect, it felt like something from a movie script, except that this was my real life, and the next few minutes were about to change everything my family believed about Craig Thompson forever. I could hear Robert's voice from the front hallway suddenly shifting from relaxed family patriarch to nervous employee as he recognized his visitor. Mr. Harrison. What a surprise! What brings you to our neighborhood? Harrison's response was too quiet for me to make out completely, but I caught fragments about visiting his mother nearby and remembering that Robert lived in this area. Robert's invitation for his CEO to join us for dessert carried a note of panic as he realized his boss was about to meet his family without any preparation. Jessica and David exchanged glances of sudden anxiety as they realized they were about to meet the head of their father's company. Sarah began frantically smoothing her hair and checking her appearance, while Tom and Linda sat up straighter in their chairs. Only I knew exactly what was about to unfold, and the anticipation felt like electricity running through my nervous system. William Harrison entered our dining room like a figure from another dimension of reality, his presence immediately transforming the entire atmosphere of our family gathering. At 55 years old, Harrison carried himself with the quiet confidence that comes from building a billion-dollar corporation from modest beginnings. His perfectly tailored charcoal suit and understated platinum watch, speaking to success that my father could only imagine. Robert followed behind his CEO like a devoted puppy. His entire demeanor shifted from the authoritative family patriarch, who had been lecturing us moments before, to a nervous employee desperate to make a positive impression on his boss. The transformation was so complete, it would have been comical, if not for the emotional whiplash of watching my father's personality fragment in real time. Please, Mr. Harrison, sit anywhere you like, Robert stammered, gesturing toward the dining room with hands that trembled slightly. Sarah, get Mr. Harrison some coffee. Or would you prefer tea, sir? We have both. Jessica, clear some space at the table. David, help your mother in the kitchen. My siblings scrambled to accommodate this unexpected corporate royalty, their earlier confidence evaporating as they found themselves in the presence of someone who controlled their father's professional fate. Sarah hurried toward the kitchen, with the focused intensity of someone who understood that serving subpar refreshments to her husband's boss could have lasting consequences for our family's financial stability. Harrison accepted Robert's invitation with gracious professionalism, settling into the chair directly across from me, with an easy smile that suggested he was accustomed to navigating awkward social situations. I apologize for interrupting your family celebration. I was visiting my mother just a few blocks away and remembered you mentioning that you lived in this neighborhood. I thought I would stop by and wish you a happy Thanksgiving. The thoughtfulness of this gesture clearly overwhelmed Robert, whose appreciation bordered on worship. Mr. Harrison, this is such an honor. Please let me introduce you to my family. What followed was the most uncomfortable round of introductions I had ever witnessed. Robert presented each family member like prized possessions he was desperate to have appraised by an expert, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and anxiety that made my stomach clench with secondhand embarrassment. This is my wife Sarah, who manages our household with incredible efficiency. Sarah, Mr. Harrison is the CEO of Harrison Industries, the company where I have had the privilege of working for the past 15 years. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, carrying her finest china cup, filled with freshly brewed coffee, her hands steady, despite the obvious pressure she felt. "It is such a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Harrison. Robert speaks about the company constantly. He is so proud to be part of your organization." Harrison accepted the coffee with genuine warmth. "Robert is one of our most reliable department supervisors. His attention to detail and commitment to accuracy have been invaluable to our accounting operations." The validation clearly meant everything to Robert, whose chest swelled with pride at this public recognition of his professional value. He continued the introductions with renewed confidence. "These are my children, Jessica and David. Jessica works in the dental field, and David has secured an excellent position with automotive parts manufacturing. Both of them understand the importance of building stable careers with reputable employers." Jessica and David shook hands with Harrison, their nervousness evident but manageable as they basked in their father's obvious approval of their career choices. Then Robert reached the introduction he had been dreading. "And this is Craig, my oldest son. Craig is still trying to find his direction in life. He spends a lot of time working on computer projects, but he has not yet found steady employment with a reliable company." The apologetic tone in Robert's voice made my skin crawl. Here was my father actually apologizing to his boss for my existence, explaining my supposed inadequacy, as if my presence at the family table required justification. Harrison's expression remained politely neutral, but I noticed his eyes studying my face with increasing attention. Something in his gaze suggested recognition, though I could not be certain whether he had identified me or was simply trying to place where he might have seen me before. Robert continued his explanation, apparently determined to fully humiliate me in front of his CEO. "Craig has always been a dreamer, Mr. Harrison. He talks about starting his own business someday, but he does not understand the practical challenges of the real world. I keep telling him he needs to accept realistic expectations and find a regular job, but he insists on pursuing these technology projects that never seem to lead anywhere productive." Uncle Tom felt compelled to add his perspective to this character assassination. "Craig is a good kid, Mr. Harrison, but he has never learned to distinguish between fantasy and reality. He thinks he can become some kind of entrepreneur without understanding how business actually works." Harrison listened to this assessment of my character with the patient attention of someone accustomed to hearing employee complaints, but his eyes never left my face. The intensity of his scrutiny was becoming uncomfortable, though I remained silent and allowed my family to continue their systematic destruction of my reputation. "The problem with young people today," Robert continued, warming to his favorite theme, "is that they think success should come easily. They see stories about overnight millionaires and assume they can achieve the same results without putting in the necessary work. Craig has been trying to make something happen with computers for years, but he has nothing substantial to show for his efforts." Sarah attempted a gentle correction. "Craig does work very hard, Robert. He spends long hours on his projects. Working hard and working effectively are two different things," Robert replied dismissively. "Craig might spend time on his computer, but that does not mean he is building anything valuable. Real success requires understanding market demands, developing practical solutions, and working within established business frameworks." Jessica nodded along dutifully. "Dad always taught us that success comes from making smart choices and following proven paths." David added his agreement. "Craig should look at examples like that CloudSync company Dad was telling us about. That founder understood what customers actually wanted and built something that serious businesses were willing to buy." The mention of CloudSync caused Harrison to sit up straighter in his chair, his attention sharpening like a laser, focusing on a target. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked on my face with unmistakable recognition dawning in his expression. "CloudSync Technologies." Harrison repeated slowly, his voice carrying a note of surprise that caused everyone at the table to look at him with curiosity. "Yes, exactly. Robert responded, enthusiastically pleased that his CEO was familiar with the example he had been using to illustrate successful entrepreneurship. From what I understand, that company just sold for $12 million to a major corporation. Now that is what real achievement looks like. Harrison continued staring at me with growing certainty, his expression shifting from polite interest to unmistakable shock as the pieces of recognition fell into place in his mind. The silence stretched across our dining room like a taut wire ready to snap, and I realized that the moment of revelation I had been both anticipating and dreading for 3 years was finally about to arrive. William Harrison stood up from his chair with deliberate precision, his movement causing every person at our dining room table to focus their complete attention on him. The silence that had begun as mild curiosity transformed into something electric and charged as Harrison took 2 steps around the table until he was standing directly in front of me. Then, he extended his hand formally and spoke the words that would shatter my family's understanding of reality forever. "Mr. Thompson, I had no idea you were Robert's son." The immediate confusion on Robert's face was almost comical in its completeness. He looked from Harrison to me, and back again, clearly trying to process why his CEO was addressing Craig with such obvious respect and formality. "I am sorry, Mr. Harrison," Robert stammered, "but I think there might be some misunderstanding. This is just Craig, my son, who I was telling you about, the one who works on computer projects." Harrison's smile broadened as he turned to address my father directly. "Robert, there is no misunderstanding. Your son Craig is the founder and CEO of CloudSync Technologies, the company that Harrison Industries acquired 3 weeks ago for $12 million. The sound that escaped from Robert's throat was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. His face drained of color so completely that I worried he might actually faint at the dining room table. Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate and sending hot liquid spreading across the white tablecloth. Jessica's mouth fell open in a perfect circle of shock, while David stopped chewing his pie entirely, the fork suspended halfway to his mouth like a frozen sculpture. Uncle Tom began choking on his wine, coughing violently, while Aunt Linda pounded his back with alarmed efficiency. Only Brandon reacted with pure joy, his face lighting up with vindication, as he realized that his admiration for his older cousin had been completely justified all along. Harrison continued his explanation, while my family struggled to process this information that contradicted everything they believed about Craig Thompson. "Your son is the youngest entrepreneur in my 20-year tenure as CEO to successfully negotiate a major acquisition with a Fortune 500 corporation. CloudSync's technology platform is revolutionary. Craig has developed data management solutions that will transform how our entire industry approaches infrastructure efficiency." Robert's attempts to speak produced only confused stammering. But Craig does not have a job. He lives in that small apartment downtown and barely seems to make ends meet. How could he possibly? Because he has been reinvesting every dollar of revenue back into research and development while building his company. Harrison explained patiently. Craig's personal sacrifice and dedication to innovation impressed our entire board of directors. His reputation in Silicon Valley circles is remarkable for someone his age. The psychological impact of this revelation rippled through our family like earthquake aftershocks. Robert's entire identity as the successful breadwinner and wise patriarch was crumbling in real time as he realized that his biggest disappointment was actually his greatest success. Harrison pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and showed Robert several photographs from CloudSync's corporate headquarters, images of me shaking hands with executives, speaking at technology conferences, and accepting achievement awards from industry organizations. These pictures were taken at various events over the past 18 months, Harrison explained. Craig has been featured in 3 major technology magazines, delivered keynote addresses at innovation summits in San Francisco and Austin, and secured venture capital funding from some of the most respected firms in the country. Sarah began crying softly, her tears a mixture of pride and regret, as she realized how completely wrong our family had been about my capabilities and achievements. "Craig never mentioned any of this," she whispered through her sobs. Harrison's expression grew more serious as he addressed this point. During our acquisition negotiations, Craig mentioned that his family was not aware of his business activities. He preferred to keep his professional life separate from his personal relationships. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Craig, is this really true? Are you actually worth millions of dollars?" I nodded silently, still processing the surreal experience of watching my secret life collide with my family's assumptions in such a dramatic fashion. David set down his fork with shaking hands. "All those times we made fun of your computer projects. You were actually building a $12 million company. The acquisition price was just the initial payment," Harrison clarified helpfully. Based on performance metrics and continued innovation, Craig's total compensation package could exceed $20 million over the next 5 years. Robert's emotional breakdown was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. The man who had spent 3 decades explaining why his oldest son would never amount to anything was confronting the reality that Craig had already achieved financial success beyond his wildest imagination. "I do not understand," Robert said weakly. "How is this possible? Craig never showed any sign of... he never demonstrated the kind of business knowledge that would be required for..." Robert Harrison interrupted gently. "Your son is one of the most intelligent and capable entrepreneurs I have encountered in my entire career. His understanding of emerging technologies and market dynamics is extraordinary. Craig has consulted with our strategic planning team on several occasions, and his insights have been invaluable." Uncle Tom had finally stopped coughing and was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Craig, why did you never tell us about any of this?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I realized that the moment had finally arrived for me to speak my truth after years of silent endurance. But before I could respond, Harrison added one final piece of information that would complete the destruction of my family's misconceptions about my life and capabilities. "There is one more thing you should know, Robert. Last week I offered Craig a permanent position as Senior Strategic Advisor for Emerging Technologies at Harrison Industries. If he accepts, he will be working directly with our executive team to guide the company's innovation initiatives." The implications of this announcement settled over my father like a weight that threatened to crush him entirely. Not only had his failure of a son achieved independent success that dwarfed Robert's own career accomplishments, but Craig was also being invited to join the corporate hierarchy that represented the pinnacle of Robert's professional aspirations. In the space of 10 minutes, my father's understanding of his family, his son, and his own place in the world had been completely demolished and rebuilt around a reality he could never have imagined. The silence that followed Harrison's final revelation stretched across our dining room like the aftermath of an explosion, with shell-shocked family members trying to comprehend the debris field of their shattered assumptions. Robert sat motionless in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles had turned bone white. "Craig," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own ragged breathing, "is this all really true?" I looked directly into my father's eyes for the first time in years and spoke with quiet certainty. "Every word Mr. Harrison has said is accurate. I founded CloudSync Technologies 3 years ago, and Harrison Industries acquired our company last month for $12 million. The confirmation hit Robert like a physical blow. He slumped back in his chair, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and dawning humiliation, as the full weight of his misjudgment became impossible to deny. But I was not finished. The time had come to reveal the complete extent of how wrong my family had been about Craig Thompson. "There is something else you all need to know." I continued, my voice steady, despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "For the past 18 months, I have been making anonymous payments toward our family's financial obligations. Sarah's crying intensified as she processed this new information. What kind of payments? The mortgage payments that you thought were coming from Dad's annual bonuses. That was me. Jessica's student loan payments that mysteriously stopped requiring monthly installments. Those were coming from CloudSync's revenue. David's car loan that got paid off early with that unexpected windfall, you could never explain. That was also me. David dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking with what I realized were sobs of guilt and remorse. The medical bills from Dad's surgery last spring that insurance did not completely cover, I paid those directly to the hospital. The property taxes that seemed to get resolved without any strain on your budget, that was me too. Robert's breakdown was becoming more complete with each revelation. But why? He choked out through tears that were now flowing freely down his cheeks. Why would you help us Because you are my family. I answered simply. Despite everything. Despite years of being told I would never succeed. Despite having my dreams dismissed and my efforts mocked. I still love you all. I wanted to help, because that is what family does for each other. Harrison observed this emotional reckoning with the respectful silence of someone who understood he was witnessing something deeply personal and transformative. His presence lent additional weight to my revelations, making it impossible for anyone to dismiss my claims as fantasy or exaggeration. Uncle Tom was the first to speak, his voice heavy with shame. Craig, I owe you an apology that I do not even know how to begin making. All those things I said over the years. We all do. Aunt Linda added her own tears, reflecting the guilt that was spreading through our extended family, like a virus of recognition. We were so wrong about everything. Jessica looked up from her hands with red-rimmed eyes. Craig, how can you not hate us? After all the terrible things we said about your dreams and your work. After all the times we sided with Dad against you. The pain in her voice was genuine, and I realized that my sister was experiencing her own crisis of understanding about the choices she had made and the person she had believed herself to be. David raised his head to look at me directly. I feel sick thinking about how we treated you. While you were building something incredible, and even helping us financially, we were making jokes about your failures and telling you to give up on your ambitions. But Robert's struggle was the most profound and heartbreaking to witness. The man who had defined himself through his role as the successful father figure and practical voice of reason was confronting the reality that his greatest perceived failure was actually his most successful child. I do not understand how this happened, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I thought I was helping you by trying to keep your expectations realistic. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment by encouraging you to pursue more traditional paths. Harrison shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the level of family trauma unfolding in front of him, but uncertain about whether he should excuse himself from such a private moment. Mr. Harrison, I said, recognizing his discomfort, thank you for coming by today. This has been enlightening for everyone involved. Of course, Harrison replied, standing gracefully and moving toward the door. Craig, please consider that advisory position carefully. We would be honored to have you join our executive team in an official capacity. After Harrison left, the family sat in heavy silence, each person processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed and what it meant for their understanding of themselves and their relationships. Sarah was the first to break the quiet. Craig, can you ever forgive us for not believing in you? Mom. I replied gently. Forgiveness is not really the issue here. The question is whether we can build something better going forward. But Robert's internal struggle was far from over. His identity had been built around being the wise patriarch who understood how the world worked, and discovering that his biggest disappointment was actually his greatest success had left him psychologically devastated. I feel like I do not know anything anymore. He admitted, his voice hollow with confusion. If I was so wrong about you, Craig, what else have I been wrong about? How can I trust my judgment about anything? The vulnerability in his confession was unlike anything I had ever heard from my father, and I realized that this moment represented an opportunity for our relationship that might never come again. I stood up from the dining room table, feeling the weight of 29 years of suppressed hurt and frustration finally demanding to be heard. My family watched me with the focused attention of people who understood they were about to receive a reckoning that had been building for decades. Dad. I began, my voice calm, but carrying an intensity that made everyone lean forward. Do you want to know what the hardest part of building CloudSync really was? Robert nodded silently, his face still streaked with tears, and his expression showing genuine willingness to hear whatever I needed to say. The hardest part was not the 18-hour workdays, or the financial uncertainty, or the technical challenges that kept me awake for weeks at a time. The hardest part was fighting against the voice in my head that sounded exactly like you telling me I was fooling myself and heading for inevitable failure. The words came pouring out of me like water through a broken dam, carrying with them the accumulated pain of a lifetime of dismissed dreams and mocked aspirations. Do you remember the night during my senior year of college when I showed you my business plan for a data management startup? You called it fantasy nonsense and told me to focus on finding a real job with a steady paycheck. That night, I almost gave up on everything I believed about my own potential. Robert winced as if my words were physical blows, but I continued because this conversation was 3 decades overdue. Do you remember the family barbecue 2 summers ago, when you told Uncle Tom and his friends that Craig would never make anything of himself because he spent too much time chasing impossible dreams? I was standing right there, Dad. I heard every word. Sarah sobbed quietly as she realized the extent of psychological damage that Robert's constant criticism had inflicted on his oldest son. And do you remember last Christmas, when you used me as an example of what not to become, when you were giving career advice to Brandon? You said that dreamers end up disappointed and broke, while practical people build stable lives and provide for their families. Brandon looked stricken as he recalled that conversation, probably understanding for the first time how much his cousin had been hurt by what seemed like casual family commentary. The thing is, Dad, I actually listened to you. Every single criticism, every dismissive comment, every time you explained why my ideas would not work, I absorbed it all and let it become part of how I saw myself. There were nights when I sat in my apartment working on CloudSync code until 3 in the morning, wondering if you were right about me being a delusional failure. Robert tried to speak, but I held up my hand because I was not finished processing years of accumulated hurt. But you want to know what kept me going? It was not spite, or anger, or some desperate need to prove you wrong. It was the memory of who I used to be before I learned to see myself through your eyes. I remembered the kid who won that science fair in elementary school who believed that technology could solve problems and make people's lives better. Jessica and David exchanged glances loaded with guilt as they recognized their own complicity in supporting their father's systematic destruction of my confidence and ambitions. I built CloudSync because I believed in something you taught me never to trust my own judgment. Every breakthrough, every successful client meeting, every moment when the technology worked exactly as I had envisioned it, I had to fight against 3 decades of training that told me I was probably making some mistake that smarter, more practical people would easily recognize. The emotional intensity in the room was overwhelming, but I pressed forward because this might be the only opportunity I would ever have to speak this truth. And then, there is the other revelation that Mr. Harrison shared with you today. The advisory position he offered me would make me part of Harrison Industries' executive team. Do you understand what that means, Dad? Robert shook his head clearly, struggling to process the implications through his emotional devastation. It means that your son, the dreamer who you said would never amount to anything, would be working directly with the CEO who determines the strategic direction of your company. It means that the failure you were so embarrassed by in front of your boss actually has more influence over your professional future than you do. This final piece of irony seemed to complete Robert's psychological breakdown. He buried his face in his hands and wept with the raw intensity of someone whose fundamental understanding of himself and his world had been completely shattered. But here is what I need you to understand. I continued, my voice growing gentler as I watched my father's genuine anguish. I never wanted to hurt you, or humiliate you, or prove you wrong. All I ever wanted was for you to be proud of me. All I ever wanted was to hear you say that you believed in my potential and supported my dreams. Sarah reached across the table and took Robert's hand, her own tears flowing, as she witnessed her husband's complete emotional collapse. The success feels hollow, Dad, because the person whose approval meant the most to me spent 30 years convinced that I was destined for failure. Money and recognition and professional achievements are meaningless when your own father sees you as a disappointment. Robert looked up at me with red, swollen eyes and spoke in a voice broken by grief and remorse. Craig, I am so sorry. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. I thought I was helping you develop realistic expectations. I never understood that I was destroying your confidence and undermining your potential. The apology was genuine, but it was also insufficient to heal 3 decades of systematic discouragement and mockery. Dad, there is one more thing you need to know. Last week, before Mr. Harrison offered me that advisory position, he asked me about my family relationships. He wanted to understand why I had never mentioned having a father who worked for Harrison Industries. Robert waited for my explanation, with the focused attention of someone who understood that his entire future relationship with his son hung on what came next. I told him that my family and my professional life existed in separate worlds because the people who were supposed to believe in me the most had spent years convinced that I would never succeed at anything meaningful. The weight of this confession settled over our dining room like a final judgment on decades of family dysfunction and missed opportunities for connection and support. William Harrison's departure left our family sitting in the wreckage of everything we thought we knew about ourselves. But something remarkable began to emerge from the emotional devastation. Robert's tears had washed away the defensive arrogance that had protected his ego for decades, leaving behind a vulnerability that created space for genuine healing to begin. Craig, he said, his voice still shaky, but carrying newfound humility, I need to ask for your forgiveness. But I also need you to help me understand how I got everything so wrong for so many years. This was not the grudging apology I had imagined receiving someday, but rather a genuine request from a man who wanted to comprehend the magnitude of his mistakes and learn how to do better going forward. Dad, you were not trying to hurt me, I replied, settling back into my chair as I felt the anger and resentment begin to drain out of my body. You were trying to protect me from disappointment because your own dreams never worked out the way you had hoped when you were young. The recognition in Robert's eyes told me that my assessment had hit close to some painful truth he had never shared with anyone. When I was your age, he admitted quietly, I wanted to start my own accounting firm. I had plans and ambitions that felt just as real and important as your technology ideas. But I failed, Craig. I failed completely, and it took me years to recover financially and emotionally from that experience. Sarah reached over and took his hand, offering silent support as her husband revealed vulnerabilities he had hidden throughout their marriage. So when I saw you pursuing entrepreneurial dreams, all I could think about was protecting you from the kind of devastation I had experienced. I thought I was being wise and realistic, but I was actually projecting my own fears and limitations onto your completely different situation. Jessica spoke up through her own tears. Dad, why did we never hear this story before? Why did you never tell us about your own business dreams? Because admitting that I had failed at something I really wanted felt like acknowledging that I was not the successful, practical father I needed to be for my family. Robert answered. It was easier to convince myself that entrepreneurial dreams were foolish than to admit that I had simply not been good enough to make mine work. The psychological breakthrough was profound, But I realized that understanding the source of our family dysfunction was only the beginning of rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by decades of miscommunication and false assumptions. Dad, I want you to visit CloudSync's headquarters next week, I said, watching surprise and hope dawn in his expression. I want you to meet Marcus and Amy, see what we have built, and understand the world I have been working in for the past 3 years. You would want me to be part of that? He asked with genuine amazement. I want my family to be part of my success, I replied. Not because I need your validation anymore, but because sharing achievements with people you love is what makes them meaningful. David looked up with tentative hope in his eyes. Craig, I have been working on some business ideas of my own. Would you ever be willing to look at them and give me some advice? The request surprised me, but it also represented exactly the kind of family dynamic I had always hoped we might develop someday. Of course, I answered. And David, the first piece of advice I will give you is that someone believing in your potential is worth more than any amount of capital investment. Jessica wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. I have been thinking about going back to school for business management. After seeing what you accomplished, I realize there are opportunities I never considered before. Education is never wasted. I agreed. And Jessica, if you decide to pursue that program, I would be honored to help with the tuition expenses. Uncle Tom and Aunt Linda had remained mostly silent during our family reckoning, but Tom finally spoke up with obvious remorse. Craig, I owe you amends that I do not know how to make. All those years of telling you to be more realistic and stop chasing fantasies. I was wrong about everything. Uncle Tom, you were doing what you thought was helpful based on your own experiences and understanding, I replied. The important thing is that we can all choose to do better going forward. Brandon, who had remained our silent supporter throughout years of family criticism, finally found his voice. Craig, could I maybe visit your company sometime? I would love to learn about technology entrepreneurship and see how innovative businesses actually work. Brandon, you can intern with CloudSync next summer if you want to get serious about understanding the technology industry. I offered, enjoying the excitement that lit up his face. But the most important conversation was still happening between Robert and me. The healing between father and son required more than apologies and explanations. It required a fundamental shift in how we saw each other and our relationship. Dad, there is something I need to tell you, I said, looking directly into his eyes. Despite everything that happened over the years, building CloudSync and achieving this success feels incomplete without being able to share it with you. Money and recognition and professional achievements are only meaningful when they contribute to the relationships that matter most. Robert's face crumpled with fresh emotion as he understood what I was offering him. Not just forgiveness, but genuine inclusion in the life and success he had spent decades dismissing as impossible. Craig, I promise you that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the father you deserve to have from the beginning, he said with fierce determination. I will learn about your work, support your continued success, and never again let my own fears and limitations blind me to your potential. 6 months later, Robert Thompson visits CloudSync's headquarters every few weeks, not as an embarrassed father making awkward conversation with his successful son, but as someone genuinely fascinated by the technology solutions we continue to develop and the business strategies that drive our growth. He has become one of CloudSync's most enthusiastic advocates, proudly sharing our achievements with his colleagues at Harrison Industries, and finally understanding the world that his son has been building while he was convinced Craig was wasting his time with impossible dreams. More importantly, our family dinners now feature conversations where Robert asks thoughtful questions about emerging technologies, shares insights from his own business experience that actually prove helpful, and demonstrates the kind of support and encouragement that might have made the journey easier if it had been available years earlier. The transformation has not erased the pain of those difficult years, but it has proven that relationships can heal when people are willing to acknowledge their mistakes, understand their impact on others, and commit to creating something better going forward. The lesson I learned from this experience extends far beyond family dynamics or business success. The most important discovery was understanding that seeking approval from people who refuse to give it is a form of self-imposed prison, but that forgiveness and grace can create possibilities for healing that seemed impossible when resentment and hurt dominated the relationship. True success is not about proving people wrong or achieving recognition from those who doubted your potential. True success is about building something meaningful while maintaining your capacity for compassion and your commitment to the relationships that define who you are at your core. My father spent 30 years convinced that dreams were dangerous delusions, while I spent 30 years desperately seeking his approval for pursuing mine. Both of us were wrong about what mattered most, and both of us needed to learn that love and family connection are more valuable than being right about anything else. Today, Robert Thompson tells people that his son Craig is living proof that supporting someone's dreams, even when you do not understand them, is one of the most powerful gifts you can offer another human being. And Craig Thompson has learned that forgiveness is not about forgetting the pain, but about choosing to build something better from the lessons that pain has taught you. That is a lesson worth more than $12 million, and it is one that no amount of professional success could have taught me on its own. I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like your family or loved ones did not believe in your dreams? Have you experienced that frustration of people dismissing your potential before giving you a chance to prove what you can accomplish? I would love to hear your story in the comments below, because I believe that sharing these experiences helps all of us understand that we are not alone in facing these challenges. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming family obstacles and achieving success despite the doubts of people who matter to us. And please share this with someone who might need to hear that their dreams are valid and worth pursuing, even when the people closest to them cannot see their potential yet. Thank you for listening to my story today, and I hope it reminds you that your biggest supporters might sometimes come from unexpected places, while your biggest skeptics might be the very people whose approval you have been seeking your whole life. Keep believing in yourself, keep working toward your goals, and remember that true success includes maintaining your capacity for love and forgiveness along the way.